When officers Ethan and Lucas were tasked with investigating a light coming from an abandoned hospital, they were understandably hesitant. In hindsight, maybe they should have rejected the job altogether, because what they encountered inside would shock both of them so much that they retired from active duty the very next day. Nobody should ever go into that hospital again. Ethan's hands were shaking so much he nearly dropped his flashlight. He was alone, as he had lost track of Lucas a while ago. They should have never split up. How could they have been so stupid? But now it was up to him to solve this mystery. He was standing in front of the hospital room from which the light had come. Ethan had considered just turning back and leaving many times by now, but he could not leave Lucas behind. He was also just too curious as to what the hell was going on in this place. It was supposed to be just a regular evening, an early night of patrolling around the city for Ethan and Lucas. The same route they did multiple times a week. It was a so-called sleeper route, as nothing ever happened here. A lot of the route led through industrial terrain and old parts of the city, where fewer and fewer people were living as the years passed. The most notable building on the route was an old hospital that had been abandoned for at least 6 years after going bankrupt. Ethan and Lucas had already driven past it twice that evening. As they were nearing the end of their shift, they were barely paying any attention anymore. But then, Ethan managed to spot something out of the corner of his eye, and he immediately ordered Lucas to stop the car. From one of the windows of the supposedly abandoned hospital, a strange light seemed to be coming. It was somewhat faint, but now that the night had started to fall, it was unmistakable. Neither of the officers had seen this before, so they called the station to report it. They were told that nothing or nobody was supposed to be in the hospital and that they had to go and check it out, but just the two of them, as they had no backup available right now. Part of Ethan already felt regret for reporting this. The hospital was enormous, and neither of them had any idea of how to navigate it. Plus, by the time they made their way inside, it would probably be pitch black. But they had gotten the assignment now, so they had no choice. Lucas parked the car, and then the pair started scaling the fence. They had no key to open it up, so this was the only way. The climb was a lot more difficult than they expected. This place was locked up well, and so were all the hospital entrances. The only way Ethan and Lucas could think of was to use the emergency staircase and then climb through the broken windows. The pair wondered that if anybody was actually in here, what entrance they could have possibly taken. They first wanted to stick together on their search, but quickly found out that this would probably take the whole night, and Lucas was not willing to do this. So, against Ethan's better judgment, they split up so that they could cover more ground. They would stay in contact through their walkie-talkies. This went well for the first hour. They managed to clear the first couple of wings of the hospital and didn't find any sign of anybody having been here in years. When Ethan tried to reach Lucas for an update, all he could hear was static. Then, after a little bit, this also suddenly stopped. Immediately after this moment, something happened that made Ethan's hair stand up on the back of his neck. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the empty halls of the hospital. There was no doubt in Ethan's mind that it came from Lucas. He started calling out for Lucas but got no response, only dead silence. Ethan quickly retreated back into a room and closed the door. He made a call back to the station to tell them what had happened. They would send reinforcements to him as quickly as possible, but as the hospital was relatively far from the station, it would take at least half an hour before they would arrive. That was way too long for Ethan. Who knows what could happen to his partner in that half hour? He could not just hide out here and wait. Every second wasted was a second too much in his mind. So Ethan took a deep breath and made his way into the hallway again. He roughly had an idea where Lucas had to have been when the contact was broken, and he heard the scream. With his weapon locked and loaded, he made his way to the staircase and went up a couple of flights to get to the level Lucas was supposed to be at. On his way, he saw a lot of boot prints on the floor. This had to have been Lucas's doing. He was always fairly heavy-handed when doing these kinds of operations. Ethan was on the right track, and it wasn't long before he found something. When he came to the reception area of the wing, he could immediately see that there had been a struggle here, and fairly recent, as lots of things were knocked over, revealing dustless spots on the desk or the ground. And then he found the final proof. On the ground was Lucas's walkie-talkie, smashed to pieces. Lucas was in danger. But there was also something that gave Ethan a bit of hope for things to end up all right. He had quickly checked around the area of the supposed struggle and had not found Lucas anywhere. That meant that whoever or whatever he had encountered had either taken him or Lucas himself was chasing his assailant. But now, Ethan was somewhat stuck, as he had no idea what direction Lucas had gone or was taken. He vaguely remembered where the light had come from that made them initially investigate. Beside the reception was actually a layout of the hospital. Ethan quickly went over it and found that the light had most likely come from somewhere in the intensive care department. It was not too far away from where he was now, and he had no idea where else to look. As Ethan was making his way over to the intensive care, he noticed that there were no obvious signs of struggle or of somebody being dragged through the hallways. The hospital was difficult to navigate, but eventually Ethan had gotten close to the intensive care department. This was first only made clear to him by the signs that were still left hanging in the hospital. But when he entered the department, something else also immediately stood out to him. It was clear that there had been people here, and by the looks of things, it seemed like they had been here relatively long already. Seats in the hallways were arranged in circles. There was no broken glass or machine parts scattered on the floor. And there was something else. All the walls were filled with words in a language that Ethan did not understand, and strange drawings and markings, all done in a very familiar color. To his relief, all the markings were old and dried up, but that didn't distract from the fact that this place looked like one of the strangest and most eerie crime scenes Ethan had ever seen. He started calling out to see if anybody was around. After trying a couple of times, it became clear that he was not going to get a response. If there was somebody here, they were not very eager to make their presence known to him. Ethan was disappointed, as he really just hoped that he would hear Lucas's voice again. He had to check the rest of the department out. There had to be something he could find here that could help him. He started going room by room, but all of them seemed to be abandoned and dark. But Ethan did manage to determine that there had probably been people sleeping here not that long ago. While the whole department was as strange as could be, nothing had stood out to Ethan as being useful. He still had no idea what these people had been doing here and why they were not here now. He did not even know where the strange light had come from. When Ethan stepped out of one of the dark rooms again, he suddenly saw it. From out of the corner of his eye, the door at the end of the hallway. Out from underneath it, there was a faint light source. Ethan slowly and silently started approaching the door. He tried to listen if he could hear any voices coming from that direction, but it just stayed completely quiet. He needed to get that door open if he wanted to find the answers he had been looking for. When he felt the handle, it turned out to be locked. But this was not going to stop Ethan, not even a little bit. He took a step back, announced his presence, and proceeded to bust the door open with a full-force kick just below the door handle. He was greeted by a bright, flickering light. It took him a little bit to adjust to it, but then he quickly realized what he was seeing. For a second, it shocked him so much that he actually jumped back a little bit. The room was full of lit candles, dripping all over the floor. The walls were full of those red words and markings again, but this time there was also a large one on the floor. There was a large red pentagram painted on the floor. It all started to make sense now. The markings on the walls, the circles, even the fact that all of this was happening in a hospital. The people that had been living here were some sort of devil worshippers. Ethan could not even bear the thought of what they could have possibly done to Lucas if he was to believe the stories. These people were supposed to be completely crazy. And then he remembered that he had actually heard a lot of stories recently that could be about these people. In the city, it had become a much more regular occurrence to find pentagrams drawn on things and even some sacrifices. There had been some speculation that some sort of devil-worshipping cult had found its way into town. As Ethan was pondering all this over, he suddenly heard a loud thud out of the corner of the room. It seemed to be coming out of the large lockers that were placed there. These also had a lock on them, but we already know that Ethan doesn't get stopped by locked doors. Ethan was very careful, as it was not out of the realm of possibilities that there was somebody in there ready to ambush him. But that was a risk Ethan was willing to take. With one clean hit from his baton, Ethan managed to smash the lock to pieces and open up the locker. A smile came to Ethan's face as he locked eyes with a scared but relieved-looking Lucas. He was tied up and gagged, so no wonder he had not been able to respond up till now. When Ethan cut him loose, Lucas started to explain what happened to him. He had been ambushed by 4 of the apparent cult members at the reception. He had tried to fight them off for a bit, but when he realized it was not going to end in his favor, he decided to cooperate with them. And so, they tied him up and brought him here. He had no idea what they were planning on doing with him, but he would hazard a few guesses. Luckily enough, nothing happened, but they had to get back to the police station as quickly as possible to report it. Ethan was making a few quick pictures of the scene as evidence when he suddenly heard a low humming from the hallway. In movement, people were approaching. They had to get out of here now. They rushed to the end of the hallway, and then they heard a scream behind them. They looked back, and at the other end of the hallway, they saw a group of people dressed in red robes and holding candles. They were most likely on their way to Ethan and Lucas. Ethan and Lucas and the group of devil worshippers stood still for a second, and then all hell broke loose. The red-dressed cult members started chasing behind Ethan and Lucas, who were running for their lives. All they could think was to go down a couple of floors and find maybe a window to get out of. They eventually found the stairs Ethan had used before to get up, and at the bottom was an exit door. Third time's the charm, as this door was actually open, and they managed to escape. With all the adrenaline, they almost managed to jump the surrounding fence and got to their car. There were legions of police officers there within 15 minutes, as they instantly responded when Lucas called in what happened. They were well in time to arrest all the cult members present before they got a chance to make a break for it. This situation is still developing, but what we do know is that this whole ordeal had quite the effect on the two officers involved. Ethan and Lucas both decided to retire from active duty the very next day, as they never wanted to experience something like this again. The abandoned hospital is now being guarded a lot more actively to avoid any more people sneaking in and making it their home or hideout. All remnants of these devil worshippers have been scrubbed out of the intensive care unit, and peace has finally returned to the city again.